At 3 a.m., somewhere on the internet, a stranger you will never meet fixes a bug in the software running your phone, your bank, and half the internet. No paycheck arrives. No manager says thank you. No meeting, no roadmap, no boss. And yet, the fix ships. This is the uncomfortable truth. Some of the most critical systems on Earth are built and maintained by people who are not employed to do so. The internet doesn't run on corporate org charts. It runs on volunteers, pseudonyms, and arguments and comment threads that never end. That should terrify you, or at least confuse you, because we're taught that serious things need hierarchy, titles, accountability, someone in charge. But open source software survives without any of that. Sometimes it even thrives. So the question isn't, what is open source? The real question is, how does something this important keep working when nobody's officially responsible? That question matters more right now than most people realize. Before we talk about how open source survives, we need to talk about how it even exists. Because on paper, it shouldn't. Most people meet open source quietly: a web browser, an app update, a server they never see. But the story starts decades earlier, before Silicon Valley became a personality trait. In the early days of computing, software wasn't a product. It was a side note. Universities and labs shared code the same way scientists shared equations. You wrote something useful, you mailed it to someone else, and they improved it. No licenses, no lawyers, just curiosity and cooperation. That culture cracked in the late 1970s. Software became property. Source code got locked away. You could run programs, but you weren't allowed to look inside them, or fix them, or understand them. Computing turned from a shared craft into a controlled industry. Then came the backlash. In the 1980s and 90s, a small, stubborn group of programmers argued that this was dangerous. Not morally dangerous, practically dangerous. If software controlled machines and machines controlled the world, then hiding the code meant hiding the rules of reality itself. So they opened it. They released programs where anyone could read the source code, modify it, and share it. Not as a hobby, as a principle. Linux, Apache, MySQL. Later, Git, Python, Firefox. The invisible backbone of the internet began forming outside corporate walls. Here's the strange part. These projects weren't built by companies at first. They were built by loose groups of people scattered across the globe. Different time zones, different languages, different motivations. Some wanted reputation, some wanted better tools. Some were just annoyed that something didn't work. No hiring process, no office, no deadlines. And yet, companies showed up anyway. Today, nearly every major tech company depends on open source software. Banks, governments, cloud providers, even competitors share the same foundations. According to multiple industry audits, over 90% of modern software contains open source components. That means trillion-dollar systems rely on code that anyone can download for free, which leads to a deeply uncomfortable realization. If open source is so critical, and no one is officially in charge, then what actually keeps it alive? That's where the story stops being idealistic and starts getting tense. On the surface, open source looks peaceful, collaborative, a global campfire of nerds sharing code and snacks. Underneath, it's a constant low-grade conflict, because when there's no boss, there's also no one to force decisions. Every change is a negotiation. Every feature request is a tiny debate about philosophy, priorities, and ego, and the debates never stop. Here's how it actually works. Most open source projects revolve around a small core group called maintainers. They don't own the project. They can't fire anyone. What they have is permission, the right to approve changes, the power to say yes, no, or not yet. That power is fragile. Contributors submit code from all over the world. Some fixes are brilliant, some are half-baked. Some solve a problem nobody else has. Maintainers review everything, often in their spare time, after work, after dinner, after life. And if they say no too often, contributors disappear. If they say yes too easily, the project breaks, so they walk a tightrope. Now add scale. A small library might have 5 contributors. Linux has thousands, millions if you count users. One wrong change can break servers, phones, hospitals, stock exchanges. And the people reviewing that change might be unpaid volunteers. This is where the math gets ugly. Studies of large open source ecosystems show a power law distribution. A tiny percentage of contributors do most of the work. In many projects, fewer than 10 people maintain code used by millions. Burnout isn't a risk, it's the default state. And then there's money. Open source code is free, but maintaining it isn't. Bugs pile up, security issues grow teeth, yet the companies profiting from the software often don't pay the people maintaining it. Not out of malice, just inertia. Everyone assumes someone else will handle it until nobody does. This is how quiet crises happen. A single maintainer gets tired, or sick, or bored. A dependency goes unpatched, a vulnerability slips through, and suddenly the world notices open source exists. Ironically, that's usually when the praise arrives, after the damage. So open source survives, not because it's efficient, but because it's stubborn. held together by social pressure, reputation, pride, and a strange sense of responsibility to strangers. But that system only works up to a point, and eventually something has to give. The turning point comes when the illusion breaks. For years, open source lived on a comforting myth. If something mattered enough, the community would save it. Someone would step up. Someone always does, until they don't. In 2014, a tiny open source library called OpenSSL failed in a very public way. It powered encryption for a massive portion of the internet. Websites, emails, logins, financial transactions. The lock icon in your browser trusted it. The project was maintained by a handful of people. Two, effectively. One of them was earning less than a fast food salary. Then a vulnerability slipped through. Heartbleed. For over 2 years, attackers could quietly read protected memory from servers around the world. Passwords, keys, private data, nobody noticed. Not because people were careless, but because the system assumed responsibility without funding it. That moment changed the tone. Companies suddenly realized something uncomfortable. They weren't just users of open source, they were dependents, and the people keeping the lights on didn't owe them anything. So money entered the room, foundations formed, corporate sponsorships appeared, Linux got backing, Firefox got deals, GitHub became infrastructure. Maintainers started receiving salaries, grants, bounties. Not everywhere, not evenly, but enough to shift the balance. Here's the irony. The more important open source became, the less pure it looked. Companies influenced roadmaps, maintainers became gatekeepers, some projects started acting suspiciously like the organizations they were meant to replace. Still no boss, but now there were incentives, and incentives change behavior. Some contributors walked away, accusing projects of selling out. Others stayed, relieved that rent could finally be paid. The romantic idea of open source collided with reality. Idealism doesn't scale by itself. But something surprising happened. The system didn't collapse. Instead, it adapted. Open source didn't survive by rejecting structure. It survived by absorbing just enough of it without fully surrendering control. No single authority, no universal rulebook. Just a messy blend of trust, money, reputation, and constant negotiation. That mess is the point, because the moment open source becomes too clean, too controlled, too predictable, it stops being resilient. It becomes just another company, and companies fail differently. The real climax isn't heartbleed, it's the realization that open source survives by always being slightly uncomfortable, and that discomfort is doing more work than any boss ever could. So if open source doesn't survive because of bosses, or paychecks, or even ideology, what actually keeps it alive? The unglamorous answer is friction. Open source survives because no one can fully control it. Every attempt to centralize power runs into forks. Every effort to lock things down creates an exit. If a maintainer abuses influence, contributors leave. If a company pushes too hard, the code can split and walk away. That threat is always there. Quiet. Powerful. It forces restraint. At the same time, open source survives because of visibility. When the code is open, failure is public. Bugs are embarrassing. Security flaws have names. Reputation becomes currency. Not the motivational poster kind, the very real kind that decides who people trust next time. And then there's self-interest. Engineers contribute because they need the software to work. Companies fund projects because broken infrastructure is more expensive than donations. Governments adopt open source because they don't want to be trapped by vendors. Nobody's acting purely out of kindness. And that's exactly why it scales. Here's the uncomfortable math. Open source is not cheaper because it's free. It's cheaper because the cost is distributed across millions of users who each pay a little, in money or time or attention. That distribution makes it harder to kill but easier to neglect, which means the real risk isn't that open source will disappear. It's that we'll keep assuming it's fine. Every time you deploy an app, update a system, or rely on a service that just works, you're standing on a tower built by people you've never thanked. Some are paid, many aren't. Most don't want recognition. They just don't want things to break. And someday, one of them will stop. Not dramatically, no announcement, just silence. An unreviewed pull request, a dependency that freezes in time. That's how systems decay now, quietly. So the question isn't whether open source can survive without a boss. It already has. The real question is whether the rest of the world can survive pretending that means it runs itself. Because nothing this important is actually free. It's just very good at hiding who pays. And the next time something critical breaks, you might finally notice who's missing. Done watching. If you like this video, hit subscribe for more cool stuff.